This section is going to be dealing with working with sellers and what the assistant's role is with this. To begin with, there are pre-listing supports that you're going to have to do. One of them might have to do with questionnaires that have to be developed for the agent to be able to give to sellers. There's also going to have to be a filing system developed. Now, what about good listings? Where do we obtain good listings? To begin with, cold calling is a great way to do that, but let me make a caveat to cold calling. In the state of Florida, we have do not call list. Now, there are two do not call lists. One is on the National Registry do not call, the other is the Florida do not call. The Florida do not call list says that if someone is acting as a for sale by owner and they put their telephone number out, that they no longer can hide behind the do not call list. We can call them. However, if someone is on the federal or the National Registry of do not call, they are still protected whether they're for sale by owners or not. Farm areas are going to be a great area to look for new listings. And let me say this about farm areas. Typically speaking, it's going to be an area of town, maybe the neighborhood that you live in. And the best way to handle it is you're going to go around knocking on doors and letting people know that you're in real estate. It's a great way to get started. Also, we're going to be looking at expired listings. Expired listings are a great source. These are folks that had their properties listed before. It didn't sell. Chances are it was overpriced, so it's going to have to take some negotiating. Also, we're going to look at for sale by owners. And let me say this about for sale by owners. These are typically people that want to sell their home, but they either think they can save money through a commission or they had a bad experience, but they're also a great source for new listings. As far as open houses, there's numbers out that we have. 45% of everyone that visits an open house typically will purchase within 2 years. So let me say this, that even though an open house may be a good source to sit and sell a home, it's an even better source to find new listings because most people, probably 80%, have to sell their home before they can purchase a new home. When we do the comparative market analysis, now let me tell you what this is. This is a mini appraisal. And what we use the CMA for is to try to come up with a value of a property, and we usually use it when we're on a listing appointment, but we may also use it when we're working with buyers and wanting to make an offer. There are three components to the comparable market analysis. We're going to first evaluate properties that have sold recently. That gives us a good idea of what our property should sell for. Secondly, we're going to evaluate properties that are currently on the market. That'll tell us what our competition is. We certainly don't want to be above our competition. And lastly, we're going to look at expired listings. Those are listings that have been on the market way too long and probably overpriced. The next thing that we need to get our arms around to be able to understand is the seller's net sheet. Now what this is we're going to take the sales price and then we're going to subtract away all of the expenses that a seller may have, because the bottom line is the seller is more concerned about their net at closing than they are anything else. Now let me say this, your local MLS has a program and all you'll need to do is to go in and do a seller net sheet. And let me suggest this, that you prepare a net sheet on any listing appointment that your agent is going on. The CMA will give you a low side, high side value. You need to do a seller net sheet on both the low side and the high side to give them a good range of what their net will be. It'll also be important to do a seller net sheet when offers come in and kind of do a comparison. As far as the listing appointment is concerned, you're probably going to be required to put together a listing packet. And that's going to include contracts and other types of documents. Now, as far as the listing contract is concerned, there are three types. The open listing, we usually don't use that. The exclusive listing, we seldom use it, but it's still used. And let me say this about the exclusive listing. This is where the seller reserves the right to sell the property themselves without owing a commission. The listing, however, that's the most important to us is the exclusive right of sale listing contract. And that's where the broker is going to get paid no matter who sells the property as long as it sells during the listing period. You're going to have to set up a filing system, and the filing system is going to have to include all kinds of information, addresses of the property owners, square footage of the property, the number of rooms, any improvements, those kinds of things. And then there's going to be a listing file checklist itself. In that checklist is going to have to be the signed listing agreement. And let me say this about the signed listing agreement. It's critical that you get a copy of the signed listing agreement back to the seller within 24 hours of its execution. It's a requirement of law. And there are a number of other things that's going to go into that checklist, and they're all in the text, but you need to take a look at those. There's also going to be some disclosures that have to be given out, and I'm going to talk about those later. As far as marketing, you're going to be required to put up yard signs, install lock boxes, put a lot of information in the MLS system, and you may also be required to physically measure the property. Now, I want you to be careful about this. It's recommended that if it's a new property, get the builder's specs on it, get their layout. You may also get an appraisal. Make sure you make a note that that's where you got your numbers from. If you have to do it yourself, be as accurate as you can. Regarding the listing inventory management, you're certainly going to have to support any of the sales activities that take place, arrange open houses and what have you. Also tracking listing activities. I'll tell you what's going to be important. You need to track where these telephone calls are coming from. Another thing that you're going to have to understand, especially when you're entering information into the multiple listing system, you're going to have to understand product knowledge, and you're going to have to understand building codes, electrical codes, those kinds of things. You'll also have to know the types of lots that you're going to be using. You have corner lots, interior lots, cul-de-sacs, but let me tell you a type of lot that we don't hear a lot about that's going to be important. It's called a key lot. And what a key lot is, it could be a lot that's a little bit larger. It's a nicer lot, maybe with trees. It's going to have more value. Typically speaking, what it's going to do is cause the lots around it to increase in value as well. You'll also need to know about roofs. There are a number of types of roofs. Your gable roof. The gable roof has two sloping edges. Now that's an old-fashioned type of roof. The more contemporary or the newer roofs that we're using today are called the hip roof. The hip roof has four sloping sides. And the reason it's more contemporary today is because of wind resistant. Your insurance bills are typically going to be lower when you're using a hip type roof situation. You'll also need to know about the various kinds of windows, insulation. Now let me say this about insulation. We measure our insulation through the R value, and many buyers have the right to inspect a home and to discover what their insulation is in a particular home. You'll also need to know what type of HVAC systems are in, whether it's gas or electrical, and what the size of the system is. As far as advertising is concerned, you're going to be required probably to write a lot of advertising. Let me caution you about a blind advertisement. A blind advertisement is any ad that's run where the brokerage entity is not in that ad. That is illegal. That's the minimum requirement of any ad. Also, if you're doing a point of contact information, this is internet information. This is internet advertising. It carries it one step further. Not only do you have to have the brokerage in there, you also have to have an address, an email address, and a telephone number. Now, as far as effective advertising is concerned, there's a number of types. Name recognition, where a lot of franchises do that. But more importantly to the agent that you work for will probably be product advertising. And that's where we're advertising a specific listing. And if your agent is good and has a good reputation, they may also want to advertise their own personal image. When we're developing great ads, the first thing that we have to do is decide on a headliner. And let me tell you what a headliner does. The headliner is going to grab your attention. It's going to say, hey, look at me and read a little bit more. Once you have decided on what a good headliner is going to be, the next thing that I want you to do is to make sure that when you write the text of the ad, that you consider the neighborhood, the price, the number of bedrooms and baths, the condition of the property, and the driving distance from schools and shopping. Buyers like to know this information, and it's very important. And that's all we have in this session dealing with working with sellers.